In this video, I want to talk about the balance of your scene. Now, it's important when you're doing final renders of your SOLIDWORKS models that you incorporate as much realism as possible. Nobody wants to make a nice detailed render that looks fake. We want to focus on the balance of the scene and make sure that we don't draw too much attention to aspects that may not look as real in renders. When we're using presentation backgrounds, such as the one here, we want to make sure that the angle of our car is appropriate. I see this all the time when people make a decent product or if they're just starting to get into renders. They'll throw this into a scene. Maybe they'll have a certain background scene. Maybe they'll turn perspective off. They'll just kind of toss this in the scene at some sort of funny angle. Now, this obviously messes up the balance of the scene. You have a nice background image and you have a lot of detail that you don't have to necessarily model. So make sure that you take the time to get the balance of everything just right. For instance, if I put this car on the hill over here on the side, that obviously doesn't look very good. We want to make sure that it looks like it's supposed to be there. Maybe if we want to rotate it around as if it was driving out of this facility. But again, you need to make sure that these angles are right and that you're getting the scene and the balance of the scene just right. For a case like this, I would realistically bring the car to the foreground, cover up all that background information, make sure that it's rotated at the right angle, make sure that perspective is on, and then we have a really nice balance. We have this in the foreground. We have it set fairly low because obviously that's where the road is. If you stick it up here, that doesn't really do anything good for you, even though it's in the center of the screen. So you want to make sure that it's in the foreground, it's set fairly low, and that you have all the detail in the background. We take a look at some of the other presentation scenes, maybe in Landscape 2. You'll notice that these are outdoor scenes. And again, I see this all the time. People take these really nice outdoor scenes and they stick something in that really shouldn't be there. Now, even though you have a nice scene and you could theoretically get the balance right, this car obviously doesn't belong in this area. It doesn't really look like it's at home here. Even though the render might look nice, the end result and the balance of what you're looking at just doesn't give you a nice result. In this case, it could theoretically be in this sort of environment, but again, you need to get that image right. If you'll start to notice as we put this in a certain area of our scene, we are overlapping the background image. Basically, the side supports the guardrail across this bridge. Now, obviously, that's not something we want. This would more realistically be set up farther, maybe as it's crossing the bridge. But again, be very careful that the angle of your product is matching. Overall, the balance has to be right. So this is obviously a single car bridge or a single vehicle bridge. So scale your vehicle or whatever the product is so that it matches the size of the components in your scene. Now, of course, we can always do a preview window and get a bit of information or maybe a bit more detailed view of what we're looking at, but the balance is very important. Now, this is actually a pretty good result. Even though this car would most likely not be set in this scene, we could actually use this and you can see that we have the headlights on and we have a nice image here. This could be a fairly realistic render. Be very careful, be cautious about what scenes you're selecting, how you're placing your product, whether it's a car, whether it's some sort of handheld device, whether it's a big machine. Make sure that where you're placing this is realistic, that it's not out on the moon or it's not out in a desert or it's not floating off in space somewhere. It doesn't have to be in the center of your screen. It doesn't have to take up a third of the screen. It has to be placed so that it's balanced and that it looks like it belongs there. In this case, it's closer to the center of our screen, but obviously the scale is right. There's a lot more background image here than there is for the actual model. Balance is a big portion of getting that final render right. Make sure that overall it just looks right and doesn't look like it's sticking out like a sore thumb.